Okay, we'll start. So good morning. So our goal today, as I explained last time at the end of the lecture, is to prove uniqueness of the Gibbs state whenever H is non-zero. And we have seen several weeks ago now that this is equivalent to proving that the function that associates to a value to the magnetic field H, the corresponding pressure, is differentiable at all H different from 0. Okay. And what we will actually prove is that this function is in fact not only differentiable at H non-zero, but it's actually real analytic. It will be analytic in some part of the complex plane which contains the positive and negative real axes. So is real analytic. Okay. So let me state the first theorem in this related to this, which is theorem 361, which is due to Li and Yang. Maybe I'll state it here. Theorem 361. So we assume that fix any beta, non-negative, and assume that you can find a piece of an open subset of the complex plane, open, connected, and simply connected, such that the following holds. The partition function, say the lambda beta H with free boundary condition. As I told you last week, we'll work with the pressure constructed from free boundary conditions. So we look at the partition function here as a function of a complex magnetic field H. Then this is different from 0. We assume that this is different from 0 for all H in D. Okay. And for all lambda in CD. So assume this is true. Assume you can find in the complex plane a set D with these properties. Then psi of beta H, which is the limit as lambda goes to ZD of the finite volume pressure defined as usual, psi is well defined and analytic on D. Okay, the pressure, if you can find a part of the complex plane on which the partition function never vanishes for all finite subsets, okay, and all H in this set, then automatically on this set, in the limit, the pressure exists and it's analytic. So this is the first part of what we want to prove. So we prove a sufficient condition, let me call it star. We prove a sufficient condition on a set D which guarantee analyticity in D of the pressure, and then there will be a second part where we'll explicitly construct a set D which contains the positive real axes or the negative real axes, and on which this condition is satisfied, which will imply analyticity on a neighborhood of the real axes. Okay, so let's prove this theorem. So that's, as I said, this is due to Li and Yang in the 50s. And okay, so to prove this theorem, I need 3 classical facts from complex analysis. So let me make it like that. So 3 facts from complex analysis. I'm not going to prove them, but if you have never seen them and you would like to see proofs, Either it's proved in the appendix of the book, or there is a precise reference to a place where you can find the proof. Okay, so the first theorem which I will need. It's a theorem which tells you it gives you some condition under which you can construct the logarithm, take the logarithm of an analytic function and get an analytic function. So let f be analytic in a subset D of the complex plane, which I assume to be open and simply connected. Now assume that f never vanishes on D. Then f admits a logarithm which is analytic. Then let me give it even explicitly. So then log of f, which is log of f plus I argument. So let me do it like that. Argument of f plus 2k pi. This for all k. This defines an analytic function. Okay, so that's the first thing. Tells you that if f is an analytic, it does not vanish on a set which is simply connected. Then it has well-defined logarithm. These are all the possible branches of the logarithm. If it's even connected, there are no other possible logarithm than these ones. Okay. Then, second result I need is Vitali's convergence theorem. It's telling you the following. So, assume you have a collection. Okay. Okay, first let D be an open connected subset of the complex plane. Open connected. Let Fn be a sequence of analytic function on D. Analytic function on D, which are locally uniformly bounded. And converge pointwise. Converge pointwise on a set having an accumulation point, a cluster point in D. Having a cluster point in D. So locally uniformly bounded just means what you think it means. So if you take any point Z in D, then you can find a small disk around Z such that the function Fn are uniformly bounded on this disk. Okay? Now the radius of the disk might depend on Z. Okay, it can change, but locally the functions are uniformly bounded. Then I assume that there is a subset of D on which the function Fn, a subset which has a cluster point in D on which the function Fn converge pointwise. Then under this condition, the function Fn actually converge locally uniformly on D, and the limit is analytic. Then there exists F analytic on D such that, say, Fn converges to F locally uniformly on D. Okay, that's Vitali's convergence theorem. And the last result I need is Hurwitz theorem. Okay. I'll try to keep everything on two blackboards so that I can write the rest of the proof there. So let D be an open subset of the complex plane. Now assume that you have a collection, so let F and Fn be analytic on D. Assume that Fn converges to F locally uniformly, and assume that Fn does not vanish on D for any n. So assume this, and Fn of Z is non-zero for all Z in D for all n. Okay. So I have a sequence of analytic function converging locally uniformly to an analytic function F, and not vanishing anywhere in the set D. Then I have the following alternatives for the limit. Then either F, the limiting function F is identically 0 on D, or F of Z is different from 0 for all Z in D. So either the limiting function has no 0, just has the function Fn, or it is 0 everywhere. There is no other possibility. Okay. So these are the ingredients I need from complex analysis to prove this theorem. Yes. Proof. So let's take a sequence lambda n converging to ZD in the sense of Van Hove.
Excuse me?
Yes?
Can you give a bit more details about what you mean by a cluster point?
Cluster point is accumulation point. I mean, there is a... Okay. You can... The sequence of points in this set, you can find a sequence of points in this set which converges to a point in this set.
Okay.
There's an accumulation point.
So cluster point is just an accumulation
Yes,
point?
it's
okay.
a synonym.
Thank you.
Okay, just so I take a sequence lambda n, any sequence you want, which converges to ZD in the sense of Van Hove, and I construct. Okay, I will do it in two steps. So first observe that the partition function Z lambda n beta h, by assumption, okay, I've just erased the assumption, but maybe I put it here again. Remember that the main assumption in the theorem we want to prove, which I called star, is the fact that Z lambda beta h, empty boundary condition, is different from 0 for all h in this set D, and for all lambda finite subset of ZD. Okay, that's the assumption we are using everywhere. So under this assumption, so I know that this guy does not vanish. Okay, so this guy is different from 0 for all h in D, for all n. Then if I look at this theorem A36, so these functions are also obviously analytic in H. Basically, it's a finite sum of analytic function of H, so it's analytic in H. So you have an analytic function, which is the partition function, which on this set D, which is given by in the statement of the theorem. it's not non-vanishing because of this condition star, so I can apply theorem A36 to conclude that it has a logarithm. So this, by theorem A36, this implies that the function h goes to, say, log of z lambda n beta h, which is just log of the modulus si arg of z lambda n beta h. This is analytic. Only. Okay. Here I chose k equals 0 among all these families of different branches of the logarithm. I choose the one with k equals 0 because I know that I want the pressure on the real axis to be real. Okay. When h is real, I want the pressure to be real. That's the quantity we studied in the rest of the course. So this is the choice which makes it real for real h. Okay, so that's the first conclusion we get. We get an analytic function for that. So now I can set for any n. I can define a function gn of h. Gn of h is just the exponential 1 over lambda n log of z lambda n beta h. Fine? Which I could rewrite equivalently as exponential of what we called psi lambda n beta h. Okay. So this function gn, well, it's just this is analytic. Exponential is analytic, so these are also analytic. Analytic in, sorry, it's analytic in D. Okay. First observation. Second observation is that for all h which belongs to D, oh, this I should have said. I wonder whether I've not forgotten something in the statement. So. Yes, I think I forgot something in the statement. So let me remind you what is the correct statement of the theorem, just in case I forgot one assumption. So the assumption of the theorem, let me rewrite it. I want D to be, okay, open, connected, simply connected. I want to have z lambda, so this star condition, different from 0 for all h. Oh yeah, okay, for all h in D. But I also want another condition in D. I want D to contain a segment of the real axis. This is important, segment of the real axis. I forgot, I think, I forgot to say that, if I remember correctly. So I want, this is in the assumption. So D is open, connected, simply connected, is satisfied this property. CD. And it contains a segment of the real axis. Then, blah, 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 what we said before. Okay? But this is an important condition, which I think I forgot. So because of this condition, I know that there are some h which are in D intersection R, which means that, okay, for all these guys, we know that psi lambda n of beta h, this converges to psi of beta h. That's one of the first theorem we proved. I don't remember theorem 3, existence of the pressure, 3.8, I think. 3.8. Okay. So on the real axis, we know that the pressure, the finite volume pressure, converge to the infinite volume pressure. Okay. So now we are almost able to apply the theorem. So we have this set D. We have a sequence of functions which are analytic on D. These are the function Gn. They converge pointwise on a set having a cluster point in D. Well, actually, they converge on a segment of the real line. So certainly, it's a set which has a cluster point in D. Then the only thing I still have to check is that these functions Gn are locally uniformly bounded. So let me do that. So I claim that Gn, this sequence, is locally uniformly bounded. Indeed, let's look at Z lambda n beta h, the modulus of the partition function. This is, yes, let's do it directly. So omega in omega lambda n. Okay, and then I take this E minus h lambda n beta h omega. I'm just taking the modulus. It was the modulus of the sum. I bound it from above by the sum of the modulus. So that's what I get here. And now the Hamiltonian, where should I write it? So the Hamiltonian, the only thing which is complex in the Hamiltonian is the magnetic field H. Okay? So I can split the Hamiltonian into two pieces, because it depends linearly on H. You can split it into two pieces, one which depends on the real part of H and one which depends on the imaginary part of H. The modulus of the exponential of the imaginary part of H would just give me 1. So this here is just equal to E minus H lambda n beta and the real part of H. Okay, omega. Okay. The contribution of the imaginary part just gives you some phase which disappears when I take the modulus. Okay, so that's what you get. So what you get is Z lambda n beta, the real part of H. So this is bounded by that. And then this we saw in the proof of theorem 3.8. We saw that this has some very simple explicit upper bound. This is bounded by what was it, exponential of lambda n, which multiply 2d beta plus real part of H plus log 2. Okay, that was, you can see the proof of theorem 3.8. There is a proof of this bound. To get it, you just remove all the interaction between nearest neighbor spins, which gives you this. You make a very rough bounds, and you get that. And then the rest follows immediately because everything is factorized. Okay, so get this upper bound, which means that if I look at Gn of H, okay, well, we said that this is exponential of 1 over lambda log of Z lambda n beta h. Okay. So that's the same thing as exponential of 1 over lambda log of, real part of the log of Z lambda n beta h. Okay. The imaginary part again gives you just something of modulus 1. Now, this is the log of Z. We have it here. The real part of the log of Z is just log of the modulus of Z. So this is just E1 over lambda log of the modulus of Z beta h. Okay. And then you use the bound we have here, and you conclude that this is smaller than exponential of 2d beta plus real h plus log 2. Okay, so this means that these guys are locally uniformly bounded because this is just something which is bounded in the neighborhood of any h in the complex plane. Okay, so my Gn are analytic, locally uniformly bounded, they converge. So this means that Gn of h converges to G of h, which is E psi of beta h for all h in D intersection R. So they converge on a subset which has an accumulation point. They are locally uniformly bounded. So I can apply theorem, where is it? A37, Vitalis convergence theorem, to conclude that the limit exists and is analytic. So I'll do it here so that I can do it here. I can remove this now. Won't need it. anymore. Okay. So now, theorem A37 and everything we said before implies that Gn, function Gn, they converge to a function G locally uniformly in D, and the limiting function G is analytic in D. Okay? That just follows from this theorem since all the assumptions have been verified. Now, what we want to do is to use Hurwitz's theorem to conclude. You see, what we are interested in is the pressure. Where is my definition of G? Gn, okay, it's defined here. So Gn is exponential of the finite volume pressure. So the limiting G will be exponential of the limiting pressure psi. And what I'm interested in is not in the exponential of psi, but psi itself. So I would like to take the log of G, log of the limit. I can take the log of the limit only if the limit does not vanish. So I need some way to say that the limit does not vanish. So this is exactly what will give me this information. So I would like to apply Hurwitz's theorem to take the log of the limiting function G. So things are pretty nice because the Gn are analytic on D, G is analytic on D, the Gn converges to G locally uniformly. So everything is fine here. The only thing, okay, it's obvious that the Gn do not vanish. So let me, okay, here, for all h, that's just from definition of Gn, it's exponential of something. Okay. So they don't vanish, and the only thing I have to see is which of these two alternatives is true, because this only tells me that the limit is either everywhere 0 or nowhere 0. Okay, and I would like to avoid this trivial case where G is everywhere 0, but this is very easy because we know that for all h in D intersection R, G of h is E psi of beta h, and this is strictly positive. Okay, so we know that the limiting function does not vanish, at least on the real axis. Okay, so this alternative is not possible. It's not possible that the limiting function is identically 0 because it's not 0 on the real axis, which means that it is nowhere 0. So theorem A38 implies that G, say G of h, is different from 0 for all h in D. Okay. And then using again the theorem A36, we can take the log. Okay. So theorem A36, we have that psi of beta h, which is equal to the log of G of h, is analytic. That proves the claim. Okay, it's really just applying these three theorems. Okay, you have something to prove when proving these three theorems, and then it's a rather straightforward application of these three theorems. Okay, so that proves this first part in what we want to do today. Now, the most difficult part, a priori, is to construct a subset D of the complex plane on which this assumption star is satisfied. Okay? Otherwise, we cannot conclude anything. And it's rather remarkable because what we might expect, okay, we have this, here is the real line. This is IR. Okay. So here's the complex plane. It would not be so surprising that I will be able to say something about the analyticity of this quantity if I'm in perturbative regime. If I'm taking a very large magnetic field or a very large, very far away from the real axis, it's not so surprising that I would be able to say something about the zero of the partition function. What is remarkable is that we will be able to say something basically everywhere in the complex plane except on the imaginary axis. Okay. So let me state the theorem. It's a very nice theorem, which is also due to Li and Yang. It's the main thing, main theorem. So let me denote by H plus the right half plane in the complex plane. So all the complex number with strictly positive real part. Okay, and let me denote by H minus the same thing, but with strictly negative real part. Okay. Now the claim is that this condition star, that the partition function never vanishes, it's true on H plus and it's true on H minus. Okay. That's theorem 362, which is also, that's the so-called Li-Yang circle theorem. Li-Yang circle theorem. I will explain why circle in a second. Beautiful piece of mathematics. Tells you that this condition star, that the partition function never vanishes, is holds for D equal H plus and D equal H minus. Okay. So if the partition function, finite volume partition function, vanishes, it has to vanish on the imaginary axis. Cannot vanish anywhere else than on the imaginary axis. So all the zeros of the finite volume partition function are on the imaginary axis. So why is it called the circle theorem? Well, as you will see in the proof, we are not going to work with H directly. We are going to work with Z. So we are going to work with Z, which is E minus 2H. Okay, basically the same thing. Okay, analyzing things in terms of H or in terms of Z, it's the same thing. And now it's easy to see that H, say real part of H is equal to 0. It's exactly the same thing as modulus of Z is equal to 1. So that means that the only zero of the partition function, finite volume partition function in terms of the variable Z, are located on the unit circle of the complex plane. Okay. All the zeros are on satisfy E minus, modulus of E minus 2H is equal to 1. Okay. So that's why circle. Z belongs to, I will denote it U. Say. U is the set of all Z in C with Z equal 1. Okay. Okay, so let me prove this theorem. This is very nice. As you will see, the proof is not so difficult, but it's somehow surprising. So proof. So first, before starting the proof, I want to say that the case beta equals 0 is trivial. So if beta equals 0, then the pressure, you can just compute it explicitly. So when beta is equal to 0, the pressure, or say Z lambda beta H phi, this is just 2 cosh of H to the power lambda. Okay. So the claim of the theorem is trivial in this case, and there is nothing interesting to prove. Okay. So we assume from now on that beta is strictly positive. Okay. So let's assume that beta is strictly positive, so the spins really interact with each other. Okay. Then what I'll do is the following. So the proof is will be a proof by induction. It will be a proof by induction the number of edges in the graph. Okay. So it's very convenient to define the graph in terms of its edges so that I can easily make this induction. So given a set of edges E, it's a finite set of edges E, I will consider the graph which is induced by these edges. We consider the graph which has a set of edges E, and the set of vertices is just the set of all endpoints of these edges E. So with V is the set of all I in ZD, such that there exists J in ZD, or say J neighbor of I, with Ij in E. Okay, it's the set of all endpoints of the edges. So I start with a set of edges, and then the graph I take is the graph which has these spins, these vertices. Okay? Good. So I will always, the basic quantity here will not be the vertices, will be the edges, because the induction is more natural on the edges. So that's what I'll do. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, it will be more convenient, instead of working with H, it will be more convenient to work with Z. So let me do that. So the partition function, so fix some E, and then the partition function ZV, beta H. Thinking what I want to, okay, let's see. So this I can write as sum over all omega in omega lambda. Then I have exponential of minus beta times the sum over all ij which belong to E, the set of all interactions, sigma, okay, omega I, omega j, and then I have minus h sum over all I in V omega I. Okay, that's just the definition of the partition function with free boundary conditions. And what I will do, let me find some piece of color. What I will do is that I will remove one here, and then I have to compensate. So whatever. So here I have sorry, there are pluses, of course. Okay. So now I have removed E minus beta times the number of edges in E, so I have to add it, so times E beta cardinal of E, and then here I have removed E minus H times the number of vertices in V, so I have to compensate plus H times the number of vertices in V. And that's just an identity. And why is it useful? Now, when is this thing non-zero? So this thing here, it's equal to minus 2 if omega I is different from omega j. So if they don't have the same sign, the spins at I and j, then I get a minus 2. Otherwise, I get 0. Similarly, here, this is equal to minus 2. Okay, I need more room. So this is equal to minus 2 if omega I is minus 1. It's 0 otherwise. Okay. So now it becomes very natural to, instead of summing over the configuration, instead of telling you, okay, here I have a plus, here I have a minus, here I have a plus, here I have a minus, what I will tell you is where I have minuses. It's enough just to say where the minuses are, because okay, on the complement I have pluses. So I will sum over x in V, subset of Z. So X will be the set of all vertices in V where sigma I is minus 1. Okay. It's a random subset of all the spins which take minus 1, the value minus 1. So summing over all X in V is the same as summing over all configuration. It's just the same thing. But now we'll express everything in terms of this set of minus spins. So one easy part is this one. So we see from here that I get E minus 2h to the power of the number of spins which are in X. So I get E minus 2h times cardinality of X. And then on this part, I get product over all ij which are in E, with I, which is in X, and J, which is not in X. I need to take all the edges. Since this is non-zero only when the spin differ, that means that one of the spins must be equal to -1. Let's say it's I, it's equal to -1, so it's in the set X, and J is equal to +1, so it's in the set V minus X. So let me write explicitly, it's V minus X. Okay. E minus 2 beta. Okay. I've just written the same thing. Of course, there are always this constant E beta E plus HV. Okay, I've not done anything. And now let me just introduce some notation. So this quantity here, I will call it A E of X. Okay, just a notation. And this quantity, I will call it Z to power X, where Z is just E minus 2H. Okay. So I've rewritten the partition function as this sum over X, AE of X, Z to power number of vertices in X, times a constant. Okay. Okay, so this means that I've written Z beta H as some polynomial PE of Z times a constant, which is this E 2 beta beta E plus HV. Okay. Where P of Z is the polynomial okay, just a polynomial in Z. Now, obviously, this is equal to 0, so we want to see where the 0 of the partition function are located. So this partition function is equal to 0 if and only if this polynomial is equal to 0. The 0 cannot come from this part. Okay, it's exponential, never taking value 0. So the 0 has to come from this part. So that means that Z V beta H is equal to 0 if and only if P E of Z is equal to 0. Or rather, what we want to prove is that this is different from 0 for all H in H plus, if and only if this is different from 0 for all Z in, let me call it U plus, which is the set of all Z in C with Z smaller than 1. Okay. Real part of H positive, since Z is E minus 2H, real part of H positive means that the modulus of Z is smaller than 1. Okay? So these are just two equivalent statements, and this is the one we are going to prove. It's a statement about some class of polynomials in the complex plane. Okay? And actually, we are not only going to prove that, but we are going to prove something slightly stronger. That's a nice trick. The idea is that this is just a polynomial, but it's a polynomial when the set of edges becomes very large, the degree of the polynomial becomes very, very large because it's Z to the power of the number of vertices in the graph. So we are interested in the limit, thermodynamic limit, so the degree of the polynomial just explodes. So instead of working with a polynomial in a single complex variable Z, but of very high degree, we are going to work with a polynomial on many, many complex variables, but which is degree 1 in each variable. Okay. And this will turn out to be much more convenient. So, in fact, we are going to prove the stronger claim that, let me call it p hat, e. I introduce the notation a second, that this quantity will be different from 0 when zi is smaller than 1 for all I in V. So what is this ZV? ZV is just a collection of variables zi, I in V. Okay? And this p hat of E of ZV is just the sum over all x in V, A E of x. And so it's exactly the same as here for the moment, but instead of taking z to the power number of vertices in x, I will just suppose that at each vertex in x I have a different z, different variable zi. So I get the product over I in V, zi, in x, sorry, zi. Okay, if I take all the zi equal to z, then this just gives me z to the power number of vertices in x. Okay, zi equals z for all I in V implies that p hat of E of ZV is just P E of Z. Okay, that's just so this claim is more general than this one. If this is true whenever the Zi are smaller than 1, particularly it's true when all the Zi are equal and all smaller than 1, which is exactly this claim. Okay, so we are going to prove this, which is stronger than that. So that will prove our result if we manage to do it. Okay. So we'll do it after the break. Okay, we'll start again. So let me just give a name to the statement we want to prove. So I hope you all agree that this is a statement which is sufficient to prove our claim. So let me call it star star. That's what we are going to prove now. So this is proved by induction on the cardinality of the set of edges. So this is proved by induction on E. So to start induction, I have to treat the case where there is a single edge. So let's say A, the case E is equal to 1. So that means that here I have just one edge in E. Oh, let me give it a name. So it's just the edge, say ij, or UV. And just one edge in the set E. Now, we want to prove this in this case. So ZV is just ZU, ZV. Okay. And let's write what this P hat is in this case. So P hat of UV, okay, ZU, ZV. Let me try to make it clear that's not the big V, it's a small v. Okay, so this polynomial is what? So we have to look at the definition of P hat, which is here. So we have to sum over all subset X of the set of vertices capital V. So set of vertices has only two vertices, so U and V. So I have to sum over all these possibilities. So the first one is that X is empty. Okay, if X is the empty set, then A of X, it's still somewhere on the blackboard, I hope. A of X is here. So it's the product over all pair of, let's say, over all edges in the graph, such that one point is in X and the other is not in X. So if I take X, the empty set, there is nobody in this product. Right? So the product just gives me 1. So this is 1. And then this is the product over the empty set, so it also gives me 1. So I get 1 for 1 when X is the empty set. Then I can take X, which is equal to U. So if X is equal to U, then that means that V is not in X. So this time I get a factor here. I get just one term in the product. Where is my AE? Again, it's here. So it will be the product over UV. So we'll have UV because U is in X, V is not in X. So I get to E minus 2 beta. E minus 2 beta. And then the product over the ZI gives me ZU. ZU. So that's x is equal to u. Then I have something completely similar when x is equal to v. So that's x is equal to v. Okay. And then I still have x is equal to uv. So what happens when x is equal to uv? Well, again, A of x is empty because both of them are in x, so I have no edges with endpoints in x and x complement. So this is just 1. And then I get a zu zv. So plus zu zv. Zu zv, that's x is equal to uv. Okay, that's completely explicit polynomial. Okay. And what we want to show is that if the modulus of zu and the modulus of zv are both smaller than 1, then this polynomial cannot be equal to 0. Okay? That's the claim, which is here. If for all my variables, the modulus of the corresponding zi is smaller than 1, then the polynomial does not vanish. That's what we want to show. So let's just show it. It's pretty immediate. So p hat uv zu zv is equal to 0. This is equivalent to, okay, you just put this equal to 0 and you see what it tells you. This is equivalent to saying that, say, zu is equal to, so if I put zu 1 plus e minus 2 beta zv, okay, and divided by zv plus e minus 2 beta. With a minus 1, I think. Okay, just check it. So if this polynomial is equal to 0, that means that I must have this relation between zu and zv. Let me check that I've not made a computational error, because otherwise it will be a mess afterwards. E minus 2 beta z plus 1 over z. It seems to be correct. Okay, so what I claim is that now what we are going to do, so fix zv smaller than 1. So we want to check whether this can be 0 when both have modulus smaller than 1. So take zv to have a modulus smaller than 1. And what I claim is that this identity implies that the modulus of zu is bigger than 1. Claim modulus of zu is bigger than 1. Which means that you cannot have a 0 when both are smaller than 1. Okay? Zu zv is different from 0 when zu and zv are both smaller than 1. Okay. This implies that. Okay, so let's just check this. It's really not difficult. So proof of the claim. So let me state the claim in the slightly more general way. So the precise statement of the claim is the following. So let phi of z, which is just alpha z plus 1 over alpha plus z, with some alpha which is larger or equal to 0 and strictly smaller than 1. Okay. This is the case for us here, because e minus 2 beta is strictly smaller than 1, since beta is non-zero, it's strictly positive. Okay, so let this then, for all z smaller than 1, phi of z is bigger than 1. Actually, this function phi, it exchanges the interior and the exterior of the unit circle, and it leaves the unit circle invariant. Okay. But for us, it's the only thing we need is this part. So let's just check that. Proof. Well, let's go. The modulus of alpha z plus 1 is alpha z plus 1 alpha z bar plus 1. Alpha is a real number. Then that's alpha square modulus of z square plus alpha z plus z bar plus 1. Okay. Then the denominator is alpha plus z, which is alpha plus z bar, which is alpha square plus alpha z plus z bar plus modulus of z square. This means that alpha z plus 1 minus alpha, the difference between these two modulus is given by what? So when I take the difference, this guy and this guy, they just cancel. What remains is alpha square, which multiplies z square minus 1, plus 1 minus z square. Okay? So now we can take 1 minus z square, put 1 minus z square in factor. So it's 1 minus z square, which multiplies 1 minus alpha square. Okay, just an identity. But now z, by assumption, z is smaller than 1, the modulus of z. So this is bigger than 0. 1 minus alpha square, alpha is smaller than 1, so this is also strictly larger than 0, so this is strictly larger than 0, which means that the numerator, the modulus of the numerator is strictly larger than the modulus of the denominator.
It should be square of modulus. No.
I've forgotten something, you say?
Yeah,
sure, of course. Sorry, of course, everywhere, yes. But the conclusion is the same. So the modulus of the numerator is strictly bigger than the modulus of the denominator, which means that the modulus of the ratio is bigger than 1. Okay. Z, what was it? Alpha z plus 1. Alpha plus z. Bigger than 1. Okay, so that proves the claim. So that proves this, and this established what we want star in the case of one edge. So now we have to assume that it's okay. Star is true for any set of edges with at most n edges. And then we take a set which has n edges and we add a new edge. So B, so that's the induction. Assume that star holds for all E with cardinality small or equal to n. Okay. Okay, what we want for goal. So that star holds for E with cardinality of E is n plus 1. Okay. So let E be such that cardinality is equal to n. Let say B, which is UV, be some edge which is not in E. So I want to add a new edge. I don't want to take one which I already have. Okay. Now there are three possibilities to consider. The one is that, okay, this is my set of edges E, and the edge UV is here. The second possibility is that this is E, and U is already in E, and I'm adding a new edge to a vertex V which was not in the set V of E. And the third possibility is that these U and V were both in the graph, but the edge was not there, and I'm adding the edge. Okay, these are the three possibilities which we have to consider. We start with the first one, then I do in detail the second one, which is harder, and then this is just exactly the same argument, and I will not do it in detail. Okay. So let's start with the easy case, which is case 1. Maybe I'll do it here. Should I let it somewhere? Maybe let me write this so that we have it somewhere on the board. P hat E of ZV, because we'll use it several times. It's the sum over all subsets of V, capital X, AE of X, product over I in V, ZI. Okay, so this I do not erase. I can erase everything here. Good. So let's start with 1. So that's the case where E in V intersection UV is the empty set. Okay, so I'm adding 2 new vertices by adding the edge. That's the edge B. So then it's easy to check in this case that P hat E union B of there is ZV, ZU, ZV. These are all my variables. Okay. Let's write what it is. But it should not be very surprising. What we will show is that this completely factorizes into a product of two polynomials. So let's just check it. So this I can write as a sum over all x in V. So this sum over x in V, I can sum over x1 in V and x2 in UV, and x is just x1 union x2. Okay, it's just one way of writing the sum of all x in the total set of vertices, which is V union U union V, small v. Okay, so that's just the same thing as the sum over x. Then I get AE of x1 union x2, and then I get product over all I in x1 union x2 ZI. Just the definition of P hat. Now this nicely factorizes over x1 and x2, but this I claim it also factorizes. So my claim is that this is, let's see what it is. So let me do it. So AE of x1 union x2, if you remember what AE is the product over all edges ij, which belongs to E union B, okay, such that I belongs to X, in our case it's x1 union x2, and J belongs to V union UV minus x1 union x2. And we get, for all these guys, we get E minus 2 beta. And just the definition of this guy. So now let's see what happens. So the main observation, we are in this case. So there are absolutely no edges between one point which is in this graph, the graph which was induced by E, and U or V. Such edges don't exist. Okay? By assumption, in case 1, this edge is completely disconnected from the rest. Okay? So there are no such edges, which means that in this product, when I take an edge, so I can take the edge B, which will be between U and V, then I can take any set of edges there, some set of edges here, and the point is that I will never be able to find this product an edge which has I inside this set and J inside this set. So this factorizes as the product over all ij in E, I is in X, J is in V minus X, E minus 2 beta, times the product over all ij in the set which contains only B. So either I take B or I don't take it. That's the only thing that there is in this product, with I in X, J in UV minus X. Okay, UV minus, yes. Okay, X1 and X2. So that's X1, X2. Okay. E minus 2 beta. So this completely factorizes because this is just AE of X1, A, B of X2. Okay. So if I take this this factorization, I insert it here, so this factorizes, this is A, sorry, it was E union B. This factorizes as A E of x1, A B of x2. So the whole polynomial factorizes, and what I get, maybe I will write it here, the whole polynomial this implies that P hat E union B ZV ZU Z small v is actually equal to P hat E. It's really pain. It's really P hat E of ZV, P hat B of ZU ZV. Okay, just factorizes. Now, this thing by assumption, this is different from 0. So by star, because we are assuming that star holds when the set of edges is at most n edges, which is the case of E. Okay, so this is different from 0 when Zi smaller than 1 for all I in V, and this is different from 0, again by the computation we just did, because here there is just one edge, when ZU and ZV are smaller than 1, which means that when the Zi have modulus smaller than 1 and ZU and ZV have also modulus smaller than 1, when everybody has modulus smaller than 1, then this is non-zero. It's a product of two non-zero numbers. So this is different from 0. Okay, when Zi smaller than 1 for all I in V, ZU smaller than 1, ZV smaller than 1. Okay, so that just settles case 1. So let's do case 2. Case 2 is when V intersection UV is equal to U, say. That's what I did. So the vertex U was already in the graph, the vertex V was not in the graph, and I'm adding the edge UV. Okay, that's what I want to do. And this is done as follows. So what we are going to do is, let me make the picture we had. So E, and there is U here, and then I will just add a virtual vertex U prime, which is not in the box. Actually, it's not even in ZD. It's just a virtual edge, a virtual vertex, and I'm adding U prime V. Okay, U prime or U prime V. Virtual edge, an edge which is not even in ZD, I don't care, it's just something like that, okay? And then what I will do, so I will work as if I was adding this quantity, which is basically what we just treated, because it's an edge which is not in the, which has no endpoint in the set, in the graph. So that's what we treated already, so I will start with this, and then I will show that if I identify U prime and U in a suitable way, then, okay, before identification, just by case 1, we know that the polynomial does not vanish. And what I will show is that identifying two vertices in this way preserves the property star star. So since it was not vanishing before, it will still not vanish afterward, after having identified U and U prime. So let B prime equal to U prime V be an edge such that V intersection U prime V. The empty set. Okay, just some. By case 1, it implies that P hat E union B prime of ZV ZU prime Z small v. This is different from 0 whenever when Zi is smaller than 1 for all I in V, Zu prime is smaller than 1, and ZV is smaller than 1. So that's small v. Okay, that's just part 1. If I'm adding this edge has no endpoint in the graph, so by part 1, I know that this quantity factorizes, and therefore by the argument we have seen, this is non-zero. Okay, so that's fine. So now I would like to show that I can identify u and u prime, and I have to do it in the proper way, so let me try to explain this. Okay, so let's fix. Okay, first, let me denote to keep space. Let me denote by v tilde. V tilde will be the set V. So all the edges in E, all the vertices in E, from which I will remove u because u I want to play with it. So I remove u, but I want to add v, small v. So it's really the set of all the vertices which are in this picture except u and u prime. Okay, everybody except u and u prime. Okay, so now fix all the zi with I in v tilde. Okay, just fix them. You can actually fix them with modulus smaller than 1, say. For all I in v tilde. And now I want to look at the dependence of this polynomial as a function of zu and zu prime. Okay, so this I can write p hat e union b prime zv zu prime z small v. This I can write as a function of zu and zu prime as something which I will write explicitly in a few minutes, but for the moment let's say it's just something like that times zu prime plus, I can put hat, minus plus zu, and that's all, p hat plus minus zu prime, p hat plus plus, and nothing. So what have I done? So I've taken this polynomial here, polynomial which depends on all these variables, and I'm only looking at what happens with u and u prime. So this is the contribution I get in this, for this polynomial when I'm only looking at the set x's which contain both u and u prime. So here I have x which contains, say, with u and u prime in x. Okay. Here I've taken all the set x such that u is in x, u prime is not in x. Here I've taken all the set x such that u prime is in x but u is not in x. And here I've taken all the set x such that neither u nor u prime belong to x. Okay, so that of course it's just a splitting of this polynomial into these 4 terms. But of course these guys are polynomials in the remaining variables. So which I will write explicitly soon. Okay, but it's not important. The say sigma prime equal to plus or minus. Okay, this is just a polynomial. Are polynomials in zi I in v tilde. Just writing it this way. I want to see the dependence on the variable zu and zu prime. Okay. And because we have chosen things such that it's degree 1 in zu and zu prime, these are the only possibilities. Okay. Now, let me erase that. Now from this polynomial, this decomposition of the polynomial, but still the polynomial itself, I want to define something which is called the Asano contraction of this polynomial. So Asano contraction of P hat E union B prime ZV ZU prime Z small v. It's defined as follows. It's a polynomial in the. Okay, I will show. So you take this, you keep the first and the last term, you remove the two intermediate middle terms, just keep the first and the last one, and you replace the product ZU prime by just ZU. So you forget one of the variables. So this is the polynomial P hat minus minus ZU plus P hat plus plus. Okay, that's what I call the Asano contraction of the polynomial. It's a polynomial. This is a polynomial in all the variables which are relevant here, here, except for U prime. So U prime disappeared. Okay. It's not anymore here. So there is no ZU prime, but it depends on everything else. Okay. So if I have this polynomial, this defines a mapping to this new polynomial, and I make two claims now, which we'll check. First claim is that whenever this guy satisfies star star, which we know it satisfies star star, that's what we just proved here. Okay? So this guy satisfies star star. Then when a polynomial satisfies star star, its Asano contraction also satisfies star star. Okay? That we'll see. Okay? And why is it useful that this guy satisfies star star? It's because this guy is exactly the polynomial we want. So claim, or I think it's even a lemma. Let me check. Okay, I don't know. Oh, let's say claim, I don't. Okay. I think it's a lemma in the notes, but I have it here. So claim, this guy, ZU plus P hat plus plus, this is equal to P hat E union B, ZV, ZV. Okay? So it's exactly the polynomial we want. It's the one when we are adding not this edge B prime, which was just an artificial construction, but the edge B itself. Okay? I mean this case. Okay. So this construction where I first add this edge B prime, and then I make the Asano contraction, it gives me exactly the polynomial I want. And since I will show that the Asano contraction preserves the property star star, this means that since the original, since this P hat here satisfied star star, this P, which I'm interested in, also satisfies star star, and it proves the induction we want. Okay, so let me first prove the claim and then prove that star star is preserved by the Asano contraction. So proof of the claim. I just have to write things down explicitly. So again, sigma, sigma prime are just plus or minus 1. And then I want to write what these guys are explicitly, or actually all these guys. So P hat, sigma, sigma prime. This is something which has the following form. So let me try to use the same notation as in my notes, otherwise I might get confused. Where have I put it? X tilde, V tilde. Okay, so V tilde was this set where I remove U and I add V, so it's everything but U and U prime. So I'm summing over this. Then I have something which I denote by A sigma sigma prime, A sigma sigma prime, E union B prime of X tilde. And then I have the product over all I in X tilde, Zi. Okay. And I still have to tell you what these coefficients are. We are going to compute them, but clearly this polynomial, they have this shape. Okay, because if you look at, where is it? If you want to look at that, say take sigma and sigma prime to be minus, I'm looking at minus minus, then in this case, both the factor ZU and ZU prime, I already have them. They're already here. Okay, I want this time ZU, ZU prime. So I don't want to have ZU and ZU prime here because I've already taken them out. Okay? So this I'm taking the product over all the zi with I, which are in x tilde does not contain u and u prime. But of course, the combinatorial factor which appears here, it has to take into account what happens at u and u prime, the fact that u and u prime are or are not in the set X. Okay, so this is where the game is going to be played. It's on this factor. So let me write down what this factor is. Here. There are 4 possibilities for sigma, sigma prime. Computation are always the same, but I will still do them all. With, so A minus minus E union B prime of x tilde is equal to what? So you have to remember what A of x is, which is not anywhere anymore. Let me write it so that you remember what it is. So A of x is the product over all ij in E such that I is in x, j is in v minus x, e minus 2 beta. Okay, that was the definition of this quantity. So let's see what happens here. So in this case, since I'm looking at a minus minus, then in this case I have u and u prime which both belong to x. Okay, that's this case. So when I take minus minus, I have u and u prime which both belong to x. Okay, then the rest of x is specified by x tilde. So I just have to look at what I get here. So I will get a e of x tilde, that's the easy part, and then let's see what we get here. So this a of x tilde is just taking into account the product of all edges which are in the set E, but now I have also to take into account the edge b prime, which might or might not contribute. So let's see, if both, okay, in particular, if both u and u prime are in x, then u prime is in x. So u prime is in x means that, do I still have the picture? Okay, let me do it here. So remember the picture was like that. We had u, that was E, then there was u prime, b prime, v. Okay, that was the picture. And then if u prime is in x, to get a contribution from this product here, I need to have v not in x, so that the edge b prime connects one point in x to one point which is not in x. Okay, so I need, if u prime is in x, I need v to be not in x to get a non-trivial factor. So I will get, say, 1 v is in x. So I get no factor if v is in x because both u prime and v are in x, so the edge does not play any role. Or v is not in x, and then in this case I get e minus 2 beta. One of these factors, e minus 2 beta, which comes from the presence of this factor, this edge. Okay, so these are the two possibilities. And then you do the same for all other cases. So now, in this case, I have minus plus, so I have u which is in x, u prime which is not in x. So in particular, u prime is not in x. So if v prime is not in x, I don't get anything interesting. So if v is not in x, I just get a 1. But if v is in x, then that means that u prime is not in x, but v is in x. So if I take the edge, I get a contribution in minus 2 beta. A plus minus of x tilde is when u is in x, u prime, sorry, u is not in x, u prime is in x. So that's ae of x tilde. And again, so u prime is in x, so I get a trivial factor if v is also in x. But I get a e minus 2 beta if v is not in x. And the last one. Okay, I forgot this e union b prime. E union b prime. E of x tilde. So here we have, sorry, it's plus plus now. So u is not in x, and u prime is not in x. Okay, so I get trivial factor if v is not in x, and e minus 2 beta if v is in x. Okay, it was a bit long, but that's the four combinatorial coefficients which come out of this this decomposition. Okay. So that's for this polynomial, the decomposition here. Now, I'll do it here. Now I want to do the same kind of decomposition for this polynomial, which is the one I'm interested in, where I'm really adding the real edge b between u and v. Okay. And then I will compare term-wise the coefficients, and we'll see that they are just equal. So, similarly, let's write p hat E union B ZV CV. This I can write as, so I want to look at it only as a function of ZU. So it will be some P hat minus ZU plus P hat plus. Okay, as a function of ZU. Either U is in X or U is not in X. And that's U when U is in X, and that's when U is not in X. And decompose again as a sum of two polynomials, where P hat sigma, so sigma again is plus or minus 1. P hat sigma is just the sum over all x tilde in v tilde, A E union B of x tilde, and then so okay, it's sigma, and then product over all I in x tilde is the I. Okay, c'est exactly the same thing as before. And now I have to compute this A sigma, and what I get is that A minus E union B of x tilde, exactly the same computation as before. So there is the part which stays inside the old graph, this A of x tilde, times. So again, there are two contributions. So here I have U by assumption which is in X. So that means that I get a trivial factor if V is also in X, because the only edge that I have between U and between V and somebody else is between V and U. Okay. Plus I get a E minus 2 beta if V is not in X. And you do the same thing with plus. So when U is not in X, and what you get A of x tilde. And now if U is not in X, I get a non-trivial contribution when V is in X. So I get trivial one when V is not in X, plus E minus 2 beta. Okay. And now you compare what we have here and what we have there. So my claim is that this polynomial here, if I take P hat minus minus ZU plus P hat plus plus, I get our polynomial. But you see that this decomposition is exactly of the same form as this one. So the only thing I have to check is that P hat minus is the same as P hat minus minus, and P hat plus is the same as P hat plus plus. Okay? And this is indeed the case. If you just look at it, so P hat, so the form of P hat sigma and P hat sigma sigma prime, I don't know where it is, somewhere here, it's exactly the same. So I just have to look at the coefficient here. And indeed, the coefficient A minus here and the coefficient A minus minus, they are both given by AE of x tilde, AE of x tilde, times 1 V is in X plus 1 V is not in X E minus 2 beta, 1 V is in X plus 1 V is not in X E minus 2 beta. So this is just AE union B prime of x tilde. And this thing you compare now with A++, and you see that it's exactly the same thing. Is equal to A E union B prime tilde, and here it was minus minus, here it's plus plus. Okay, that proves that these things are equal. You just use the definition, you check that they give the same quantities. So there is no deep trick here, it's just a computation. Okay. Okay, so now we know that, so our goal now is to show that this guy does not vanish when all the variables have modulus smaller than 1. Okay, so we know that the original guy, this guy does not vanish when all the variables have modulus smaller than 1, so I have to find a way to conclude that its Asano contraction also does not vanish. So maybe I keep it and I erase that. Can I erase that? Yes. Everything is in the notes in any case. So let's see. So remember that we have fixed Zi smaller than 1 for all I in V tilde. So that means everybody except Zu and Zu prime have modulus smaller than 1. Okay? We have seen that P hat E union B prime. Okay, let me write it directly in terms of this coefficient. So P hat minus Zu prime plus P hat minus plus Zu plus P hat plus minus Zu prime plus P hat plus plus does not vanish. When Zu and Zu prime have modulus smaller than 1, because when they have modulus smaller than 1, then everybody has modulus smaller than 1, and we have just checked that in this case, this does not vanish. So to show, what we have to show is that the Asano contraction, P hat minus minus, Zu plus P hat plus plus, does not vanish when Zu is smaller than 1, which means that in this case, that's exactly the claim we want, because this is just the polynomial we're interested in, right? So we have to go from this to this. It's very simple, very nice. So let me say that this is A and this is B, these two claims. So what does A tell us? So I can take A. This is true for any pair Zu prime of modulus smaller than 1. In particular, it's true if I take Zu equal to Zu prime equal to Z of modulus smaller than 1. So let's take A with Zu equal Zu prime equal to Z. This implies that this polynomial here, so the polynomial, I don't want to rewrite it, P hat minus Zu, okay, Z square, plus it will be P hat minus plus P hat plus minus Z plus P hat plus plus. This guy, this polynomial, does not vanish. And this smaller than 1. It's just a particular case of this where I take the two variables to be equal. Okay, that's the same thing. Now, this is just a second degree polynomial in one variable. So it's very easy to analyze this guy. So in particular, if I denote by let Z plus and Z minus be the two roots of this polynomial. Okay, it's a second degree polynomial. It has two roots. Let me call them Z plus and Z minus. Now these two roots, we know that necessarily I have the modulus of Z plus and the modulus of Z minus, which are larger or equal to 1. Because there are no roots. The polynomial never vanishes when modulus is smaller than 1. So the modulus of Z plus and of Z minus are both at least equal to 1. That means that the modulus of their product is also at least equal to 1. So Z plus Z minus, this has to be greater or equal to 1. Okay. Now, what is the product of the two zeros of a second degree polynomial in terms of the coefficients of the polynomial? So that's secondary school stuff. So we have that Z plus Z minus. This is just the modulus of P hat plus plus over P hat minus minus. Okay, we have this polynomial, second degree polynomial. The product of the roots is just given by this over this. Okay. So we conclude, since this we said larger or equal to 1, we conclude that this over this has modulus larger or equal to 1. Okay. Up to now, nothing very fancy. So let's see what it tells you about this polynomial, the Asano contraction. This implies that, so okay, let's see. So the 0 of this polynomial, p hat minus minus z plus p hat plus plus, this is equal to 0. Well, it's not very difficult to find the 0 of this polynomial. Z is minus p hat plus plus divided by p hat minus minus, right? So the modulus of z is p hat plus plus, p hat minus minus. Okay? But we have just seen that this is bigger than 1. So indeed, this guy has no 0 of modulus smaller than 1. Okay. So this proves that indeed, this thing we were interested in, PE union B, ZV satisfies star star. Okay, so I summarize. We wanted to add an edge with one endpoint in the graph, one endpoint outside the graph to our original graph. This is tricky to do in one step, so we don't do it in one step. We first add an edge, a virtual edge, which has the same endpoint outside the graph, but some virtual endpoint for the other extremity of the edge. And then in this case, we have something which factorizes, because the edge is not part of the graph at all, so there is a factorization. And so in this case, star star holds. And now what we do is that we prove that this Asano contraction, it amounts to taking this edge, this vertex u prime and identifying with u. Okay, it gives you exactly the polynomial, the polynomial which you get when you add really the vertex, the edge b between u and v. Okay, and we saw, so that first thing. And the second thing is that since this guy satisfies star star, the Asano contraction also has to satisfy star star. And then this Asano contraction we have just seen is the polynomial we're interested in. So we have proved that the polynomial we want satisfies star star. So that proves the claim in the case 2. And for the case 3, I will not do the details. But the case 3 was when v intersection u small v was equal to uv. So both vertices were already in the set v, but the edge was missing, and I'm adding the edge. Okay. And then what you do is what you expect you should do. So you start with E u prime v prime. So you add now, you introduce an edge which has two endpoints which are virtual. They don't really exist, but just for the computations. I put it then there. And then what I do, so here you have u and here you have v. And then what you do is you make a first Asano contraction to identify u and u prime. So that will give you that. And move this here. First Asano contraction, and then you do a second Asano contraction to bring v to v prime, or v prime to v. Okay, so you make two Asano contraction. Asano contraction preserve the property star star. Therefore, since this guy, which is factorized, so this guy satisfies star star, you do that. Now this still satisfies star star because the Asano contraction preserves star star. And then you do a second Asano contraction and still preserves star star. Okay, that's exactly the same proof we just did. You just have to repeat the same things. So I will not do it. So this concludes the proof of this Liang theorem. So let me just steal you 2 more minutes, and then I'm done. Just want to summarize what we have shown. So we have shown that in the first Liang theorem, we have seen that if you can find, so that's the complex plane, that's the real line. If you can find some set D, which contains a piece of the real line, some segment of the real line, on which the partition functions ZV, beta h, are different from 0, or say lambda, for any finite lambda and any H in D. Okay. So if this was true, then the free energy exists and is analytic. So this implies that psi exists plus analytic in D. So that's what the first Lee-Yang theorem tells you, and the second Lee-Yang theorem tells you that actually you can take D is equal to H plus, say. So this implies that psi is analytic. Okay. Psi is analytic on the set real part of H strictly positive. Okay. So in particular, psi is real analytic when H is positive. So in particular, psi is differentiable when H is positive, which means that you have uniqueness. And of course, the same is true taking H minus here. You have the same thing when H is smaller than 0. Okay. So this completely concludes our analysis of the Ising model, because we have constructed completely the phase diagram. We have determined for which values of beta and H you have or not uniqueness. In particular, if you look at what we have proved in terms of the magnetization, what we have done. So we have proved, in particular, that when beta is smaller than beta C, the magnetization in terms of H, it's a node increasing function which is continuous at the origin and which is analytic everywhere else outside the origin because it's derivative of an analytic function. And when beta is larger than beta C, you have a discontinuity at H equals 0, where the value is m star or minus m star, which is spontaneous magnetization. It's still increasing odd, and the branches here and there, they are both analytic, or real analytic, but there is a discontinuity at the origin. So this was exactly what we discussed in the introductory part of the course, the first lecture, for this ferromagnetic paramagnetic phase transition, ferromagnetic behavior, paramagnetic behavior. And it's quite nice that in this model you can completely do it from scratch. You can prove the whole phenomenology. Okay. So with this, we have finished this chapter, and next week we start with the Gaussian free field.